Today on our show, man, who created the Joker? We all think we know, but I think we found a mystery on the back of an old comic book page. This is something out of a comic book, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to sit around and talk to the one man who discovered perhaps the real secret origin of the Joker today on Fat Man on Batman.
But I started collecting comic book art in the early 90s when Gaston and I were roommates and when we were still at Fantastic Store and before he left to do Meltdown. And I helped him do construction on that first store, shot his first commercial, and we bought entire comic books. And Glenn Danzig was actually the guy that...
You bought entire comic books full of artwork, original artwork.
Cover to cover, all the original pages. So I put together the Pop Sequentialism show, and I realized I've written like 80 pages of descriptions, because you had to. And so I thought, well, I'm not just going to put this up online, I'm going to publish this.
Nice.
And so we'd already published 40 books with La Luz de Jesus Press through Last Gasp. And so we put it out, and you know, it's out there in the world, and it's become kind of a price guide for original comic book art. Nice.
Where can they find it?
You can get it at laluzdejesus.com. Any place that carries Last Gasp product, they can get it there. There's a popsequentialism.com as well. But what I thought was great about this is that it got me really more interested in, okay, what's my follow-up? Right. The first one is just the last 25 years. What if I go back and start like really giving some extra credit to people who maybe aren't as worshipped as I think they should be?
Right.
And there was a guy who sold comic art online, and his website was obviously set up at the dawn of the web, like Al Gore era World Wide Web. And it was just like an Excel document online. And I'd look at this page and be so frustrating because you'd look at something and it was too big for the size of a monitor. You'd have to like slide over to see, okay, here's the art, the page number, and here's the comic title, and here's the artist, not for sale. And so there was like 6,000 pages listed in this guy's collection, and maybe 85% of them were not for sale. So anybody who went to that website spent 2 minutes on it.
And it's fucked off. They're like, this is too frustrating.
Yeah, I can't deal with this, and I'm out of here. And
but a hunter will study everything.
Yes, I could smell blood through the screen. I could smell the game. And so I was like, at the time, my girlfriend was out of town, and I'm like, I'm just going to spend all night going through this guy's site to see what's on it. And by the time... And I decided to reverse engineer it. I went to the prices first, and then just only looked at what was available, and then scrolled back to the left to see what it was. Right. So under unknown were these interesting Batman preliminary pages.
Explain preliminary pages to those that are like, ugh.
A preliminary page is often considered a practice page. It's where an artist will start to outline what the story is going to look like, and then for whatever reason, switch gears and go in a different direction. And it doesn't always look like a completed comic page. Sometimes it'll just be pencils and then some ink studies and blank panels. And it said, he had it listed as, I think, unknown, and it said Batman number 10. And then when I opened up his, the JPEG, it had listed George Rousseau's, ?
And who's that?
George Rousseau was the anchor of Batman for Jerry Robinson. Okay. And Jerry Robinson was the first person to draw Batman besides Bob Kane.
Really? Is that true?
Yeah.
So he's the very first person other than Bob Kane to draw Batman.
Yep.
He's the father of Robin.
Yep.
Jerry Robinson creates Robin when Bob Kane's like, we need a kid in this book for kids.
Bill Finger, actually. Bill Finger came up with the idea for Robin and said that he thought that it'd be good to have a kid that the readers could identify with. And Jerry Robinson was a teenager at the time, and he was taking night classes at a local college, and I think it might have been Columbia. I'll have to double check. But he figured, okay, yeah, you know, and he came up with this idea from...
Well, he met Bob Kane, I just read this recently, he met Bob Kane at a country club. Yeah. He was a kid working at a country club, and he had a jacket on with drawings that he had done himself.
Yeah.
And Bob Kane, as an artist, was like, that's interesting, let me see your coat. And who are you, kid, and where do you go, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I'm going to go study at one school that was not near New York or whatever.
Yeah.
And Bob Kane was like, it's a shame you're not studying at Columbia or whatever, because, you know, I could use you. And he wound up doing that and then going to work with Bob Kane as a teenager.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Can you imagine, man? Like,
Jerry's dad owned the first movie theater in New Jersey.
where?
It was in oh my God, not Newark.
Trenton?
Trenton, yeah.
Holy fuck, really?
Yeah. First movie theater in Trenton, New Jersey.
How strange, man.
Yeah.
And his parents played bridge a lot. That's an important part of the story as well.
Yes, his brother was a professional poker player,
Mm-hmm.
and his mother was a semi-professional bridge player. Cards were all around their house. And
Good to know. Good to remember that, kids. That's an important part of the story later on. Now, give these cats who are unfamiliar with, Jerry Robinson's done a lot of great things, but one thing he's not known as is the father of the Joker. Who created the Joker according to comics lore?
Well, Bob Kane claimed credit for decades and would not give up credit even to Bill Finger. Jerry Robinson spent a lot of his life getting credit for Bill Finger.
As well as Siegel and Schuster.
Yes, and actually he was the person who made the phone call that actually closed the deal with Warner Brothers to get Siegel and Schuster their health insurance and a bit of a settlement on their claim to Superman.
I think Siegel or Schuster's wife, one of them, like sent him back, like I've read something, a letter that were telegram, whatever fuck, going like, you are that most precious of gems, a good friend. Like he looked out for those guys.
Yeah, and he had also helped to set up early artist communities. In the 1950s, he was brought in to teach at the Cartoonists Institute, which became School of Visual Arts.
Wow, holy fuck! That's SVA came from the Cartoonist Institute.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so Bernard Hogarth was one of the guys that helped form that school. And Bernard Hogarth was considered a fine artist, but he also did the Tarzan dailies.
Yeah, the Tarzan.
And so he and Jerry and Will Eisner would go on the road and do these lectures about the fine art influence in comic book art. And so Jerry and Bern would do these drawings, and Will would talk, and then Jerry would talk, and Bern would just keep drawing.
Could you imagine, dude? Like fucking, if you could buy a ticket for that now, how much money you would pay for watch those three fucking dudes either talk or casually draw on a stage?
And this is the 50s. This is like the mid and early 50s.
Before fandom began, before anybody knew that there was a fandom, you had some dudes who actually did the job going out there and being like, this shit's serious.
Yep. And so Jerry was constantly working for other artists' rights, helped set up a comic book syndicate, which is a service that places comic strips in international publications, not just in newspapers in the U.S. His son, Jens, helped set that up when he went to school in England, and they started placing works that Jerry would set up, and he had a team of people, his former students at SVA, working with him. And those students included Steve Ditko, Don Heck.
Fuck.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Kids, Steve Ditko, for the uninitiated. Spider-Man, anybody? The Question, fucking a bunch. And Don Heck, Thor?
The Hulk.
Hulk?
Sorry, Iron Man.
That's it.
Iron Man, helped develop Iron Man. And I mean, and the other students were no slouches either. And Eric Stanton, who became a very famous like bondage comics artist, was also out of that class.
Get out of here.
Yeah,
I've seen
so
his
it was
books too in bookstores.
Yeah, and actually a lot of those are quite valuable now.
Really?
Yeah. A lot of the Stanton stuff's out
And
of
I
print.
can admit, I have a few of those books. All right, so Jerry Robinson, salt of the earth, good guy.
Yep.
All around, by all intents purposes, reports. You never met him, I never met him. You
Right.
ever met him?
No.
But all reports, good fucking dude. So these pages that you saw on the dude's website, did they say Jerry Robinson?
There was a question mark next to it. So it was George Rousseau and a question mark. And I'm like, George Rousseau was an inker. He wasn't a penciler. And
This is like some shit out of Murder, She Wrote right here, dude. This is a Law and Order episode because you're reverse engineering. You're going, wait a second.
And it was a front of a page and then two other pages. And then I noticed that one of the pages had a backside. But why I was interested is my favorite character is Robin. Robin is my all-time favorite comic book character because I feel like I could be Robin. You know, that any of us could be Robin. Like I'm not an alien.
Right.
I'm not a mutant. I'm not a billionaire. But if my parents died, I
The
could
dream
be,
of every young child. If only my parents would fucking die so I could be Robin.
if I was orphaned, I could be adopted by a millionaire.
See, that Bill Finger was right. He was just like, we need somebody in this fucking book for the kids.
Exactly,
For the
something
kids.
to aspire to. But the other thing is that he's also very much a veiled archetype for all children, that we all live in the shadow of our fathers until we become our own man.
Oh, I like that.
So Dick Grayson, throughout the history of the character, becomes Nightwing, and I was reading Teen Titans when that happened, and loved Judas Contract's, like one of my all-time favorite stories. And so I was like, well, this is an original. There was a prelims of Robin by the guy that created Robin, and I looked at the prices, and they were ridiculously cheap. They were like $350 and $700, and I mean, prelims from the 1930s or 40s are extremely rare. In the 1940s, especially 1940, 41, any paper that was lying around that wasn't being used went straight into war paper drives. The reason that the Mummy movie poster is more valuable than Dracula and Frankenstein, which are far superior films, is because paper drives ate up all those posters the second that the film went out of release.
Really?
Yeah, so they're very, very rare. And comic book pages, the artists that were working on these, and comics were new. Published bound comic book stories in that size were new. The strips had been around, but they were only just starting to bind strips, and then Superman becomes a major hit, and National Publications is looking at a follow-up, and Bob Kane develops Batman, and it becomes a thing. So Bob Kane wasn't a fast or particularly adept draftsman. So he finds Jerry, he hires him to ink his drawings, but Jerry ends up redrawing all the pages, like everything.
He's a perfectionist?
Yeah, and good, and a gifted guy. And so Bill is writing most of the stories. Bob's name is above title, and nobody else's name is on the comic. And after a while, Dick Sprang becomes the regular guy on Batman and in Detective, and he was an assistant for Jerry Robinson. So I'm looking at these pages, and I happen to open this second view of this other page, and I look on it. And so the front page has what looks to be the origin of Robin. So you've got the Flying Graysons dying, and on the reverse page, and it's not a standard like 9-frame setup, or even like
Let's put the picture up. Let's put up that first one right there. There's the page in question.
Yeah, and so that's the back side of that page.
That's a busy page, particularly for the year it was made.
Right, and it's too long. So that would not shrink down to standard comic book page. There's an extra line below of drawings so this was practice for something.
Clearly meant to be practice.
Yeah. And you see...
Now, on the one side of it is the death of the Flying Graysons. We
Yes.
see them on the tightropes, on the trapezes and stuff. This is on the... There's that page right there. But
Yep.
get ready to go back to the one we just saw. See them on the trapeze? Go back, I'm sorry. The one we just saw. Whoop, whoop, whoop. There's the trapeze image. So that's considered the front of the page.
Yes, because
that's what you first saw.
That's a standard preliminary. It's got the right amount of panels. It shrinks down to the right comic book size.
And on the back of this go back to that previous picture, was this.
Yes.
Now, take us into it and tell us why this is interesting. Maybe do we close up yet? Let's have everybody look at it right now. What strikes you about that image?
Well, anybody who's familiar with the origin of Robin knows that it was just standard gangsters that are responsible.
Zuko, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Who kills his family.
Who ends up killing his family. There's no clown in that story at all.
No.
None. And while it takes place at a circus, no clown is pictured. And when they develop the origin of Robin, you're talking Detective 38, that same year, within 2 months, Batman's popularity is such that they rush Batman to his own title, just as they had previously rushed Superman from action into Superman. And so it's a really fast exchange. And since he was just a backup character in another comic, they didn't have a lot of stories ready to go. So they had to kind of do double duty. So they knew they were going to do 4 stories for this Batman #1. So Jerry said, well, I've got this idea for a really great villain, because he was taking a class on the adversarial nature of storytelling mechanics. And he figured that he needed something more robust than the gangsters that Batman and Superman were even fighting at that time. What if there was a super villain? And so, being in a card-playing family and having access to, this deck of
See
playing
where
cards.
this is going, kids? You see where the mystery is coming to?
He makes a drawing of a Joker that we know comes from 1939. Now, the first appearance of the Joker in Batman is 1940. It was very common for people to be ahead, knowing that the publishing schedule was like 4 months out. And often when you see the date, still on comics today, it may be months ahead.
2 months out, 3 months out.
So it wasn't any different back then. But what was different was that they loved, Bill Finger was the more experienced writer, and Jerry never written anything before. So when he pitches this idea, they're like, well, let's give this to Bill to do, because he's more experienced. And I've heard that Jerry cried because he was so disappointed, because he wanted this to be his first thing, but that he relented because he knew it would be better, and it gave him enough time to illustrate these other things. They still went with a story, a Hugo Strange story in that first Batman that was already earmarked for an issue of Detective, because they couldn't get the work out fast enough.
Right.
And Bill was not a particularly fast writer, and Bob's involvement was minor at this point. So when I saw this, I'm like, there's a clown. There's clearly a clown on this.
Go back, throw that image up of the close-up. There's the first one's there. Go to that other one, the second close-up of the clown. Now,
So
what is that
that's-
gangster saying?
That's the first appearance, and he's like, boss, Batman's here.
Okay, now no gangster is calling. There's only, the clown is looking at him.
Yep.
So it's either that strong man or that clown that this gangster is saying boss to, indicating that that clown is in charge. And heretofore in a Batman book or any comic book, no clown has been a bad guy or in charge of a gang.
In anything.
This has to be, without a question, the secret origin of the Joker.
If it's not the Joker, it is clearly a prototype of the Joker, and the original idea was to have that character be responsible in some way
For the death of
Robin's parents.
So that's an even bigger deal. It's not just like, hey, kids, maybe Jerry Robinson created the Joker, but hey, kids, we almost had a fucking origin where the Joker was tied in with Robin.
Yeah. So even after...
What do you think happened?
Well...
Because all the players are gone, right?
All the players are gone. So here's what's interesting about this. So I start thinking about this, and I'm like, okay, well, number one, this is a preliminary page, which is rare. That often in that time, if they weren't going to use the images, they just erase it and start all over again.
Right.
And then I thought, this is an inked preliminary page.
That's the thing. Let's throw up those pictures again, man. Or you can even look at it. Yeah, see, you can see it there. We have it here on the desk.
You can see some pencil, and you can see a lot of ink. And it's extremely rare in this era for anybody to waste ink, to waste the paper, really.
Right.
Because they saw the prices of illustration board rise in the late 30s and early 40s because of paper drives. So I was thinking that this image...
side. There's the historic side. You were thinking this image?
The image that was on the front, which does wind up in a Batman comic and the retelling of the Robin origin, it's not issue 10 as this collector had it listed, it was issue 11, but that those panels appear later in comicdom. Mm-hmm. So again, because these guys were always on deadline and they were working on multiple projects for multiple companies, why wouldn't they have just finished that page on the front? Because it's very close to the page that wound up getting published. But for some reason, they chose not to. And I don't know if it was because both Jerry and George realized that this was an important thing to keep for whatever reason. I don't think it would have been necessarily for credit, and I don't think that's the kind of guy that Jerry was, and everything that I've learned about him leads me to believe that he would not have been doing that. But at some point, they figured out that we're going to keep this, even though it's not published, and it stayed in Jerry's collection at least until the late 80s, early 90s. And
how did it get out? How did you wind up getting it?
So I found out from Sotheby's that the pages came from Jerry Robinson, that Jerry, or the person who got them from Jerry Robinson, and that what had happened is that he would routinely donate comic art for auction for charities, and the types of charities that, the Heroes Initiative would be taking care of today. And it may have actually been for raising money for Siegel and Schuster.
Kind of guy just grabbing some top shit off a pile where he's like, it's fine, this can go and stuff.
So there were 3 pages that were part of this collection of work. And I bought 2 of them, and I left the 3rd one with the guy because I thought that if this page winds up being what I think it is, it's going to be good to leave that with him.
Right.
And
you weren't a total pig about it. We were like, this fucking Rube doesn't know what he got. I got it all. You were like, here, man, I'm going to take this, but I'm going to leave you.
But I'm also sweating, and I'm like hiving at this point. Like, oh my God. And this page looks like it was set up in 1992, and, you know, it's probably not even available.
Right.
And so I'm like, well, I can't just buy these, because if I buy all 3 of these, number one, he may know that the ruse is up and not sell them. They're probably not available, but if they are, what else can I get? And I start pouring through the rest of the site stuff that I was looking at, and I found a page that was credited to Vince Colletta from Modern Romance. It was clearly a Jack Kirby page, and the page is clearly an influence on Dave Stevens. The way that the girl is drawn, it's just such the Jack Kirby that Dave loved. And then I found a couple of Terry and the Pirates dailies, and I also found a Charles Schultz Peanuts page, which had actually sold when I heard back from the guy. So I do hear back from him, and he's like, well, you know, I don't accept credit cards. I only accept checks, which means you have to be verified. Like, you have to, you know, who do you do business with? And I'm like, okay, who do I buy? I buy comic book artwork from everybody, you know, I buy from, and I start running down the list, you know, Albert Moy, you know, Felix. I start naming off all these guys, and he's like, oh yeah, I know Felix. And he's like, okay, so you can send a check. And I was like, well, can I send you a business check? Because I run a gallery. He's like, yeah, no problem. You just have to wait till the check clears. And so I sent it to him, and I'm just like waiting. Yeah, I overnighted to him. And I'm waiting for the pages to show up, and I'm just like, oh, you know,
where was he?
Come.
Where in the world?
He's in Canada.
Okay. And
so I finally get the package, and I'm just like, you know, put on the rubber gloves and open up the masonite that it comes in. And the top page is not a page that I ordered.
So right away, you're like, no,
yeah,
I've been screwed.
I've been screwed. And then underneath, everything else was fine. And actually what it turned out is that it wasn't a wrong page of what I ordered, that he accidentally threw in an extra page. And I emailed him and let him know that he had, and I sent it back to him. And then I started asking him questions like, where'd you get these? And he let me know that he had picked them up at a Sotheby's auction. And I had him email me the receipt that he got from Sotheby's. And I started talking to him. I said, you know, I think there might be something to this page. And as I do the research, I'll let you know. And as I started digging into this, and like I say, you know, figuring out that this is clearly the right size paper, it doesn't have any of the earmarks that a fake would have on it, which would be like a DC Comics stamp, which would not have existed at that point.
Right.
The type of ink is clearly India ink. You know, it's the type of stuff that these guys would have been using at the time.
I mean, honestly, it's like, for people who are not in the room, you've seen the graphic online, but it's fucking breathtaking to hold a page this old with sample imagery from a master who would later go on to make this a piece of our American mythology. Yeah. Like, it's fucking nuts, man. When you're sitting there looking at it and holding it, I was just staring at the images before. Human being did this. We don't even think of these cats as human beings because they're gods who created gods. But as a kid who sat down and fucking drew, like, wonderful perspective. Like, but this is rough.
Yeah.
And this is before he even brings his final pen to it. But it's fucking breathtaking, man.
But choosing to ink it, that was kind of like the real the game changer.
Why? What do you think? Why?
You wouldn't erase ink. If you were going to cover it over for reuse. So do you think
somebody was like, this is important?
Yeah, at some point.
Really?
I think that even maybe when it was done, that somebody decided, and maybe it was feedback that Jerry got from George Roussos, or maybe even Dick Sprang, that it was like, keep this page. Like, don't sell this. Like, hang on to this.
You know who we work for. Keep this page.
Or he understood that it was his and he wanted it. Like, oh, this was the first thing that I did in his character.
Like, I got a clown villain. I think it'd be badass.
He was 19 years old.
Wow.
You know, that this was the evidence that he had created this awesome thing and he was keeping it for himself. And so I think at some point he just went through and rifled through a bunch of pages and just pulled them out. This was on the back. You know, it might not have been in the front of the stack. It might not have been in the back of the stack. And he forgot and just like...
It's one way. He probably forgot. But, you know, the more romantic version is like, well, it's time. And he just put them out into the universe. And like, let's just see what happens.
See what happens,
really leaving it to chance. That is a fucking story and a half, dude.
Yeah.
Like, holy shit, man. Like, what are you going to do with the page? I asked you on the podcast, but I said put it in Lucite and hang it up in La Luz so everybody can walk in and fucking see it. But what are you going to do?
The thing about, hanging stuff like that in La Luz is that it would have to be part of an exhibition. Because it's double-sided, it would have to be hanging in the middle of the room. And I think it belongs in a museum. And as I've studied the sale of important comic book art, you see things like, the non-French record holder for most expensive comic art sold was the Todd McFarlane Amazing Spider-Man, where Spider-Man's holding up the Hulk.
Yeah.
And that went for $660,000
Really?
before the buyer premium. So 20% above that is what the person paid for it.
Holy Christ.
And that's a
You
recent...
gotta love both. You gotta love Todd McFarlane, Spider-Man, and the fucking Hulk, man.
Yeah, and it's certainly a great run.
Yeah.
But it's not rare. There's a lot of Todd McFarlane covers. There's a lot of Todd McFarlane interior pages, and arguably a better Hulk cover, the Wolverine cover.
Wolverine Hulk cover is pretty amazing. Yeah.
So for that to go for that amount of money signified that there was enough interest in the hobby about well-rendered artwork. And the record holder overall is a Tintin illustrated cover, and that went for over $1 million. But something like this is, it's a unicorn among unicorns. It's really, really rare.
Kidding. Yeah,
it's a mystery. What's the line from JFK? It's
like a mystery wrapped in a riddle, trapped inside an enigma.
And it's just, if this vindicates Jerry Robinson's claim all these years that he was the creator of the Joker, then that alone makes it incredibly important. But when it changes the canon, that the Joker may be responsible or was intended to be responsible, or this prototypical version of that character is somehow responsible for the death of Robin's parents, that changes everything. And what got me back into collecting comics was an episode of Simon and Simon in the 1980s. And there's a comic book that holds the answer to a real-life murder. And it was the first time I realized that there could be a number in the middle of a run that was worth more than a number one. And it got me interested, and I was like, oh, I should look at my comics. And I found out that there were comic book shops, and I went and it became my regular, church, just going to this comic shop. And the guys that worked in that shop became like my mentors, Paul Glavin, Paul Marcure, Tom Stogowski, who became a comic book professional. And
how weird, man! An episode of Simon and Simon trips the dominoes.
Who knew that the B side of the Magnum PI 2-hour block on CBS Thursday night would have such an impact?
I guess I'm not tired yet. I'll watch Simon and Simon, and that fucking led to this, dude.
Yeah,
this is astounding, man. Like, what a life on this fucking guy. Man surrounds himself with things he loves, arts he's tripped into and sought after, and sometimes tripped into amazing situations. But this may be the crowning achievement in a very interesting fucking life, dude. You may have fucking found something very, very important to those of us who care about this shit, which right now in the world is everybody.
Yeah.
And it's really at the heart of it is the story of a 19-year-old kid who was just like, I think I got a cool idea that looks like it been co-opted, and he didn't quite get the credit for it, man. Or didn't get credit for it at all.
And was more interested in getting credit for his mentor, Bill Finger, than for himself.
Really?
And in the early 90s, Bob Kane did finally relent and say, yeah, Bill Finger helped me out with the Joker.
That was it, really? He was just like,
They'd always kind of let...
There he is. Is that Bob Kane himself?
That's Jerry Robinson.
That's Jerry
Robinson.
Yeah.
God, they look alike, don't they?
Jerry's a little taller, I think.
There's another one of him when he's older.
Yeah.
I remember that Jerry Robinson.
Yeah.
That when I was a boy, that was Jerry Robinson.
He curated a show in the 1970s and 1975 on comic book art, and there was a Mel Ramos painting of one of his Batman covers that was then being appraised for something like $165,000.
So somebody painted a version of his Batman cover, and that was going for 160. Do you think he was just like, "What the fuck?"
He's
man?
like, "I got paid $100 for that."
Yeah, to say the least. Jesus Christ. Fascinating fucking story, man. Matt Kennedy, he gives good fucking guests. I'm fucking telling you, you aced it on the home show. You aced it on this, man. Plus with graphics to show people. What do you guys think? What is it, man? And ladies, of course. When I say guys, I mean both genders. Is this what we all think it is? Because fuck, dude. It's like, what is the, they say it's like you eliminate the impossible and all you're left with is the possible.
And I think that there's a lot of fans who would love this to be the case.
Yes.
And what I wanted to be really careful about in the research that I've done on this is to not, oversell a claim. That there is only a certain amount of evidence that is out there. And because all the principals are dead, the other person who would have been in the room at the time is also dead. He was an older man even back then. He was the editor who I think fine-tuned a little bit of the Robin stuff. And he may have been privy to it, but I mean, people who were around talked about it. And so when I started going back and looking for sources to check things out, you'd see people giving interviews in comic publications and in illustration publications and in union papers for like illustration unions, that they would talk about, Jerry Robinson, and they would list him as, co-creator of not just Robin, but the Joker and other characters. So there were clearly people that were banging that drum for a long time, enough so that Bob Kane said, no, he didn't.
Had to go out and be like, nah, that ain't true.
Yeah. He's like, I'll give him Robin. His name's Jerry Robinson, and everybody knows it's Robin. But I think that it was bad enough that he had to relinquish credit for not just the Joker, but also Batman with Bill Finger, that, one was enough.
Right.
There's no way he was going to split it 3 ways, because then that made his achievement less.
And probably look, I don't know the guy, I never met the guy, but I'm sure he was just like, this kid, we started him.
Yeah.
He's got his whole job, and he's Jerry Robinson because of us. We didn't do anything bad here. We just
his first employer.
work for hire.
Yeah.
Wow, man, it's fucking nuts. Great story. Go to Two Shot. Great fucking story. What's the show that's happening this weekend at La Luz?
This weekend is Lindsay Way and Jessica Adams. And Jessica, yes, from Jack Off Jill and Scarling, and Lindsay Way from Mindless Self-Indulgence. And they'll be opening their show, and we've got 5 great ladies in the back that are doing a separate show. And it's going to be incredible. It's going to be amazing. We just got the artwork in tonight. We're hanging it tonight. And yeah, it'll be up all month.
Life, man. Let me tell you, you're ever in Los Angeles, if you're in Los Angeles and you haven't gone to La Luz, you're not an Angelino. If you ever come to Los Angeles, make the time, go to La Luz, Wacko Soap Factory. It's sublime, man. It's everything that you love. Look at that building. Come on. It's just graphically fucking beautiful to begin with. And as good as it looks outside, you walk inside, man. It's like a Wonka bar. It's all gold on the outside. You open it up, chocolatey, with a golden fucking ticket. There it is. What a fucking, one more time, because, come on, how often do you hold history? Look at this. This is, I feel like Nick Cage in that fucking movie where they broke open the Declaration of Independence. National treasure.
See, I haven't even covered this on my own podcast yet.
Tell them about your podcast.
Pod Sequentialism. It's on the Meltdown Network, and have a lot of guests on. Love to have you on when you're free.
I owe you, man. Quite, you did it twice. I'll definitely jump on yours. So they can listen to you. How often you do it? Every week?
Every week. It launches every Sunday. It's on iTunes. It's also on SoundCloud.
Fantastic. Yeah. And they can get the book at
laluzdejesus.com.
And they could see you at La Luz.
At La Luz, yep. And come to Wacko, say hi.
Come to Wacko and buy some shit, man. Tell them the fucking, before we go out, tell them the Michael Jackson thing. It's so fucked up.
Wow, okay, so I think the last recorded footage of Michael Jackson out in public is him visiting Wacko. And they would always call ahead. I've worked at like 3 places where Michael Jackson has called and they've shut the store down.
Really?
Yeah, fantastic store. Originally,
he would do that too.
He'd wear funny teeth and he'd bring in sick kids and buy them whatever they wanted. He was great.
Get the fuck out of here. That's really sweet.
Yeah, he was a really, really sweet guy, and he'd crack kind of interesting. Like he had an odd sense of humor, and he'd just say stuff, and you just be like, "That's Michael Jackson." Like you don't even know how to react to it.
Right? Like, is he kidding or is he for real?
And but he came in and he shopped, and I think he had his kids with him as well, and there was some other kids, and he had the hood on, and he had the fake teeth. And he bought a bunch of stuff, and he also bought an original art piece, a Brian Poor mechanical piece. And it became covered by the tabloids. And it was
because that was the last place he was publicly before he passed.
Yeah, and it was on the, what do you call that show, the paparazzi show?
TMZ.
TMZ ran a thing, so they ran video on it. And Michael Jackson is huge the world over. Yeah. And I mean, he was always big in the U.S., but I mean, he's got almost like messianic status in other places.
King of pop.
Yes. And there's a Japanese tour group that comes to the gallery.
I love this.
Like every second Tuesday in like a little minivan, and they come and visit and they look at the receipt.
They've saved the receipt. It's at Wacko behind the register, hanging there. The receipt, and it's long. It's really fun to look at because you're like, this guy bought a lot of shit.
It's like 4 feet long. And they come in and they look at it and they see what they can afford and they buy the same items that are on the Michael Jackson receipt.
Isn't that amazing? I'm stealing that and putting that in a movie. That's so fucking real, it's beyond real. That's nuts, dude. They look at the receipt and they're like, well, I guess we could afford this.
You could also make it about Prince.
Yeah, that's true. Does he ever go in? Do you ever get?
I've only seen him in public once, and it was twice at Glam Slam when he ran the club. And he would just sometimes perform for hours, like after hours.
Really?
Yeah, you'd walk in and he'd be like, shut the music down. Like, kill the dance music and get up and play. And then I saw him at Coachella.
Fuck, dude, fuck.
Yeah.
I worked with him once, too.
I know.
But still, fucking badass to see him at Glam Slam. That's fucking that's like living in Purple Rain. God damn it, you're a lucky son of a bitch. If there's anyone in this world I want to be other than Kevin Smith, it's Matt Kennedy. He's been our guest here today on Fat Man and I'm Batman, man. Let us know what you think. You think this is the real deal? It's gotta be. Who the fuck? Who stands against this? You know what I'm saying? After this last hour, if you're not like, you know what, I'm pretty sure Jerry Robinson also created the Joker, then you must be a Nazi robot. There it is. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thank you for coming in and doing the story again, this time with graphics and stuff, and standing the whole time. Last time we sat for hours.
Yes.
Got blazed and fucking talked. It's a great podcast. Go listen to it, man. That's over at smodcast.com. Thanks for hanging out with us here today on Fat Man, I'm Batman, man. I've been Kevin Smith. This is Matt Kennedy. Go visit La Luz de Jesus in Los Angeles. And come back next episode right here. Same fat time, same fat channel. smodcast.com/Kevin Smith. Hey man, it's me, Kevin Smith. Thanks for watching. Do me a favor, click that thing below that says subscribe. Every time you click that, you save a baby kitten from murder.